Our Megan Fitzpatrick is live outside the courthouse in London. She joins me now. So Megan, take us through the rulings and what we heard from Justice Carroccia.
Yeah, and I'm keeping my eye on the courthouse behind me, Andrew, because we are expecting plenty of reaction now that Justice Carroccia has finished reading her ruling, which began hours ago here in London, around just before 10:30 this morning. And it took her several hours to lay out her ruling. I'll sort of take you through how the morning and afternoon have unfolded. Justice Carroccia saying right at the beginning, virtually, when she started reading her ruling, that in this case, I have found actual consent, not vitiated by fear. I do not find the evidence of EM, who is the complainant, to be either credible or reliable. Justice Carroccia going on to say, with respect to the charges before this court, having found that I cannot rely upon the evidence of EM and then considering the evidence in this trial as a whole, I conclude that the Crown cannot meet its onus on any of the counts before me. So that kind of set the table, Andrew, for the next few hours. But it did take the judge time to go through. She recapped some of the key pieces of evidence that were heard at trial, including the testimony of EM, including the testimony of Carter Hart, one of the accused. He was the only one of the five to take the stand. She recapped those so-called consent videos that were introduced as evidence at trial. So she was going through all of that through her ruling, and then she kind of got into the analysis of that evidence and basically determining what evidence she was accepting and what evidence she was rejecting. And ultimately, Andrew, I mean, the onus was on the Crown here, right? To prove the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And there were 6 charges here. There are 5 accused, each charged with 1 count of sexual assault. Michael McLeod facing that 2nd charge of being a party to a sexual assault. Now, it all boils down to the judge saying she was left with reasonable doubt. At issue here was whether the sexual activity that occurred in that hotel room that night was consensual or not. The Crown and EM testifying it was not consensual. The defense lawyers for each of the 5 accused saying that EM was a willing participant in the sexual activity and that at times, in fact, she was instigating it. Now, the judge was saying because she was left with a reasonable doubt about consent, the next sort of step in her analysis and what she had to weigh and determine was whether the consent was vitiated, meaning was it sort of canceled out because of other factors like fear. EM had testified that she was scared in the hotel room. She had testified she did not know that other men were going to come to the hotel room, and she was surprised when they started arriving. She had gone back to Michael McLeod's hotel room. The 2 of them engaged in consensual sex. It's what happened after that when the other players arrived that was at issue here in this trial. Now, the judge saying in her ruling that she essentially did not find any evidence that EM was truly fearful in the hotel room. And she pointed to one of the consent videos as part of her reasoning for that. There were 2 videos shot throughout the night. On one of those videos, EM can be heard saying, "I'm okay with this." And in another, she says it was all consensual. The judge saying she did not find that EM looked intoxicated or sounded intoxicated in those videos, or scared or fearful. So she rejected that evidence from EM that she had been scared. So in the end, again, she was left with reasonable doubt. She was not satisfied that the Crown had proven each of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. The Crown had argued in her closing arguments that they had proven each case. They had urged the judge to find EM reliable and credible, saying she had been consistent in her version of events throughout, and where there had been any inconsistencies, they described them as minor and said EM had explanations for them. The defense had urged Justice Carroccia to find EM not reliable, not credible, and they had accused her of lying. They had accused her of fabricating her version of events, in part to support the civil lawsuit that she had later filed years after the alleged incidents. And I should note, just in terms of the timeline of all this, Andrew, the allegations date back to June of 2018. That is when the junior hockey team, World Junior Hockey Team, was here in London for a gala event to celebrate their World Championship win earlier that year. After the alleged sexual assaults, a police report was filed. There was a police investigation, and the case was closed with no charges laid. Then in 2022, news broke that a civil lawsuit had been filed by EM against Hockey Canada and unnamed players. That lawsuit was settled. Then London police reopened the case in 2022, and they laid charges in early 2024. That's how we arrived here at this trial in 2025, the trial starting in April and lasting 8 weeks. As we know, I won't recap all of it right now, but there were a lot of twists and turns in this case. It had started out as a jury trial. That first jury dismissed, a new jury chosen. Then that one was discharged and it became a judge-alone trial. There were a lot of procedural issues that were dealt with within the trial. For example, pertaining to certain pieces of evidence that, well, the Crown wanted it entered as evidence, certain text messages, and they were not allowed. So there were several delays throughout the trial, but it finally did wrap up a couple of weeks ago, and the 5 accused have been waiting for a couple of weeks until today to learn their fate. Near the end of her ruling, she did sort of go through each of the allegations against each of the 5 players, and then again stating that she was finding them not guilty. At the very end, she sort of summarized all of the counts on the indictment and again stated that she was finding them not guilty of the charges they were facing. And then she said right at the end, Andrew, the accused are free to go. So now the question will be, does the Crown appeal, right?
And she also said
do they appeal
you have 30 days, right? You have 30 days to make
That's right.
to
The Crown has 30 days to file a notice of appeal. Yeah, but when they do that, they'll have to lay out sort of what grounds they're going to try and argue for the appeal. They will have to try and identify what they will argue were errors made by the judge throughout the trial. So they can't just say, we're appealing. They have to have some solid, they have to lay out their reasons for appealing and identify those areas of appeal in order to try and overturn these acquittals.